In the marble corridors of American power, where precedent whispers through the columns and the weight of history presses upon every decision, a confrontation is unfolding that transcends the ordinary friction between branches of government. What begins as a dispute over concrete and steel, over ballrooms and blueprints, is rapidly becoming something far more consequential, a test of whether the quiet authority of the judiciary can withstand the force of a presidency that views legal obstacles not as boundaries, but as challenges to be overcome. This is not merely a story about construction, it is a story about the architecture of power itself. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must first step back from the headlines and consider the scene. A federal judge, exercising the solemn duty entrusted to the judicial branch, issued a ruling to halt a massive construction project at the White House, a proposed ballroom, envisioned as a monument to prestige, to legacy, to the sheer scale of presidential ambition. The order was procedural, grounded in statute and environmental review, in the careful, deliberate pace that the rule of law demands. It was, in the normal course of American governance, a routine check, but in this instance, routine has been discarded. The response from the former president, from the political movement that orbits him, was not appeal through measured legal channels. It was defiance, framed as principle. It was a declaration that the project would proceed, that the ruling was an affront, and that the ultimate arbiter, the Supreme Court of the United States, must now choose to stand as a barrier or to step aside. The narrative, as it has developed, is layered with intention. On the surface, we have the physical, a ballroom, a space for galas, for diplomacy, for the ceremonial pageantry that accompanies the office. Supporters describe it as a necessary modernization, a functional upgrade to a historic residence that has, for decades, accommodated the evolving needs of the presidency. Critics see it as ostentatious, a vanity project that diverts resources and attention from more pressing concerns. But to fixate solely on the structure is to miss the point entirely. The ballroom is a symbol. It is the tangible manifestation of a broader philosophy. That the executive, particularly this executive, possesses a mandate that supersedes procedural hurdles, that the will of the people, as channeled through a singular leader, can and should accelerate the machinery of government, even when that machinery is designed to move slowly, deliberately, with caution. Here, then, is the hidden angle, the element that transforms a zoning dispute into a constitutional drama. The push to the Supreme Court is not a simple request for review. It is a strategic framing. By elevating the case with such urgency, by portraying the lower court's injunction as an act of judicial overreach, the narrative shifts. The question is no longer, does this project comply with existing law? The question becomes, does any branch of government have the authority to impede the vision of a president when that vision is presented as the direct expression of popular will? This is a subtle but profound recalibration. It invites the court not merely to interpret statute, but to weigh in on the very balance of power that has for 2.5 centuries prevented the accumulation of unchecked authority in any single branch. And now the revelation, the twist that gives this story its explosive charge. Sources close to the legal strategy suggest that the appeal to the Supreme Court is accompanied by a parallel, unspoken calculation, a test of institutional resolve. The argument, in essence, is this. If the court declines to intervene, if it allows the lower court's halt to stand, it risks being portrayed as part of a deep state resistance, an unelected body obstructing the agenda of an elected leader. If, however, the court grants the appeal and clears the way for construction, it does more than approve a building project. It signals a new tolerance for executive assertion, a willingness to accommodate a style of governance that prioritizes action over process. The ballroom, therefore, is a proxy. Its fate will be read as a verdict on the limits of presidential power in an era of heightened political polarization. Why does this matter? To answer that, we must engage in the kind of analytical reasoning that seeks not the sensational, but the significant. The American system of government was designed by men who distrusted concentrated power. They constructed a framework of checks and balances, not as an impediment to efficiency, but as a safeguard against tyranny. The judiciary's role within that framework is intentionally counter-majoritarian. It is meant to protect minority rights, to uphold procedural integrity, even when doing so is unpopular, even when it frustrates the immediate objectives of the political branches. When a president publicly challenges a judicial order, when he frames compliance as weakness and defiance as strength, he is not merely disputing a single ruling, he is challenging the foundational premise that no one, not even the president, is above the law. Consider the broader context. We live in an age of institutional distrust. Polls consistently show declining confidence in Congress, in the media, in the courts themselves. In such an environment, the perceived legitimacy of each branch becomes a fragile commodity. A Supreme Court decision that appears to bend to political pressure, that seems to reward confrontational tactics, risks accelerating that decline. It could reinforce a dangerous narrative that power, not principle, is the ultimate currency in Washington. Conversely, a decision that firmly upholds judicial authority, that insists on process, even when it is inconvenient, could be dismissed by a significant portion of the electorate as elitist obstruction. The court therefore finds itself in a precarious position, tasked with rendering a legal judgment that will inevitably be interpreted through a political lens. The global dimension cannot be ignored. America's constitutional system has long been a model, however imperfectly emulated, for democracies around the world. The peaceful transfer of power, the independence of the judiciary, the notion that leaders are subject to the law, these are not parochial American quirks. They are pillars of democratic governance. When the world watches a president openly defy a court order, and when the highest court in the land must decide whether to sanction that defiance, the implications ripple far beyond our borders. Authoritarian leaders take note, democratic allies watch with concern. The perception of American stability, of its commitment to its own rules, is a component of its soft power, its ability to lead by example. A moment like this, therefore, is not an internal affair. It is a signal to the world about the health of American democracy. But let us bring this down from the abstract to the personal. Why should you, the viewer, care about a ballroom at the White House? The answer lies not in the architecture, but in the precedent. Every citizen has a stake in the question of whether our institutions can withstand pressure, whether the role is applied equally to everyone, regardless of title or popularity. If the principle is established that a president can ignore judicial orders with impunity, what prevents future executives from doing the same in matters more directly affecting your life? What stops a future administration from bypassing environmental regulations, from overriding property rights, from dismissing legal protections in the name of expediency? The ballroom is the test case. The principle at stake is universal. Furthermore, this story speaks to a deeper anxiety that many Americans feel, the sense that the system is breaking down, that the norms and traditions that once guided political behavior are eroding. When leaders treat institutions as obstacles to be bulldozed rather than partners in governance, it fuels cynicism. It makes engagement feel futile. Understanding the stakes of this confrontation is the first step toward demanding accountability, toward insisting that our leaders respect the framework that has, despite its flaws, preserved liberty for generations. Your voice, your vote, your attention, these are not insignificant. They are the mechanisms by which a self-governing people correct course. As we look ahead, several questions linger, designed not to provide easy answers, but to provoke continued thought. First, if the Supreme Court does intervene, what standard will it apply? Will it focus narrowly on the procedural specifics of this construction project, or will it address the broader question of executive compliance with judicial orders? The scope of the decision will matter immensely. A narrow ruling might diffuse the immediate crisis, but leave the underlying tension unresolved. A broad ruling could redefine the relationship between the branches for decades to come. Second, what is the long-term strategy here? Is this confrontation an isolated incident, a product of a particular personality and moment, or is it part of a deliberate effort to reshape the balance of power, to establish a more muscular, less constrained executive branch? The answer to that question will determine whether we view this episode as a storm that passes or a shift in the political climate that endures. And finally, a question for all of us. In an era of intense polarization, how do we as citizens engage with these foundational debates without succumbing to partisan reflex? How do we uphold principle without descending into tribalism? The health of our republic depends not only on the wisdom of our judges and the restraint of our presidents, but on the discernment of the people. In the end, this story is about more than a building. It is about the blueprint of American democracy. It is about whether the structures we inherited, designed to endure, to adapt, to balance, can withstand the pressures of our time. The Supreme Court will soon deliberate. Its decision will echo through history. But the ultimate verdict, the one that truly matters, will be rendered by the American people in their collective commitment to the rule of law, to the separation of powers, to the idea that no ambition, however grand, is above the Constitution. As this narrative unfolds, we invite you to stay engaged, to seek out diverse perspectives, to think critically about the principles at stake. The future of our republic is not a spectator sport. It is a shared responsibility. Thank you for watching.